Hi, I'm Sandy Thompson here at PBS 39 with your show tonight on Senior Spotlight, a very interesting one it is. We're going to be talking about everything you need to know about pre-planning funerals. Not a topic you probably want to think about, but should be thinking about, either for yourself or maybe you want to help mom and dad do some pre-planning. So our show tonight is for all ages here because it could encompass any of you. Some topics that certainly are involved are: where can you bury a person? What do you do with remains if you're cremated? How much does it cost? What does it entail to pre-plan a funeral, and why should you? Those are some of the topics our experts are going to be addressing tonight, but of course we invite you to call in with your questions. We have complimentary advice for you tonight. Very professional people here, including at the far end of the desk here once a month is Steve Adair. He's an elder law attorney, so he'll be able to answer any of the legal ramifications of planning and pre-planning funerals and what to do about it or your loved one. Then in the middle, we have a guest tonight. First time for me to meet you, Nate. This is Nate Heffel, and he is a pre-planning advisor for a funeral home. So you are an expert in this. This is what your job is, to help people with pre-planning. What's another word that you use to explain it?
That's a good word, pre-planning advisor.
Okay, all right, then that's what you are tonight,
Yes,
Nate.
yes, yeah. For the past 22 years, that's what I've been.
Oh, all right. See, then he's definitely an expert in that field. And then again, no stranger to our show, Bob Ray next to me, who's an attorney and a CPA, and he's going to be answering questions like, how does it involve Medicare, and how do you do the funding, and the financial aspects, as well as some of the legal ramifications. Let's start off tonight by asking Nate, our special guest, who's been doing pre-planning for 22 years, why should a person pre-plan their own funeral or help mom and dad pre-plan theirs?
Yeah, that is a great question. That question we get asked every day. And I think there are a lot of different reasons, but the main reasons are there are emotional reasons for doing it, there are financial reasons for doing it, and every family circumstance is a little bit different. But having had, I've lost 3 family members in the last 2 years, and having gone through that experience, you get a sense of really why people need to do this is so that you can really focus on honoring the person that passed away. So having all the arrangements done ahead of time, having all the information or having a game plan, if you will, to go by is so important, so that when the time comes, the family doesn't quite have to make so many decisions. They're going to have plenty to do.
Anyway.
You betcha. They're going to have plenty to do. So again, for me personally, it's been a mission, if you will, for the last 22 years, because eventually we're all going to pass away, and your family's going to be put in those circumstances where they're going to have to come to the funeral home and make those arrangements. So just like any responsible human being, we want to make sure that with our assistance that you have as much done as possible, so that when the time does come, your family has at least an outline of things to go by, so that again they don't have to make all of the decisions that are necessary when someone does pass away. Again, financial issues as well to deal with.
Right.
You bet. When there's nothing done ahead of time, or there's no money set aside, if you will, then it becomes that issue too. How do we pay for the things that we want to do? Yeah. So we want to get that information in our families' hands years and years and years before they ever need our services, so that when the time does come, they have everything, their wishes, if you will, laid out in front of them, instead of the family having to go, I wonder what we should have done. And I've been in that situation with what I've done over the years too, visiting with families after they've lost a loved one, where they, many of them said to me, I just felt like we were in some sort of a fog when we were making those arrangements. And so this really enhances the experience for the family.
And I've heard that sometimes it can cause dissension among the family if they're trying to make these decisions, and one brother wants to do this and the sister wants to do that, and that's not a time to have dissension.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. There's a phrase that one of the people that I work with has used for years. The funeral home employees become the Lord's lightning rod for all the dysfunctional things that may have taken place, prior to the death. And every family dynamic is different. But again, this just levels the playing field. In other words, when the family comes together, these are the wishes of the person that passed away, not my wishes personally,
Yes.
or maybe someone else's in the families. It's that person's wishes. So there's
Right.
really no arguing over what needs to be done. It's very simple. These are the things that I would like to have done. Now, having a prearrangement done doesn't mean that you have to do everything that person said. So there is some leeway, and you can customize or tailor it, if you will, to the way that your family may want it if it wasn't exactly laid out the way you think it should have been. But certainly it makes it much, much easier.
You mentioned financial. So Steve, I want to go over to you about that. If someone passes away, legally, what do they need to take care of immediately? And second question for you, if you're pre-planning, like Nate had suggested, do you put this in your will, like allotting so much money for that? How does that all work?
Well, when a person passes away, Sandy, the first thing to do is to call Nate. And
Of
we
course.
we do have people that call us first, and we say, hey, you better call the funeral director or something, or Nate or somebody in that position. So that's really the first thing. Take care of the family, take care of the funeral, take care of all of the calling and all of that, and then come in to see us as soon as they're ready after that time. It's important to make sure that the funeral is the way that everybody would like to have it, and make it as good an experience as a bad experience like that can be. And then they come in to see us, and then we start talking about financial things. You asked if they should put it in the will.
Right.
Putting it in the will doesn't help much, because by the time they see us for the will, Nate's already buried them. So you need
Will
to
is
keep,
not the place to specify the
it
money.
is not. And people often will say, I want to put this in my will. We hear that every day almost. And the fact is, they need to have those plans outside their will. They need to have them and have the family know where these plans are, have them, a copy of them at the funeral home, and all of this, so that people know exactly what they want. And there's even a fairly new form that's available to us in Indiana, where you can specify what kinds of things you want with your funeral in advance, and you can write it and sign it, and those directions should be followed.
What about paying, Bob? Can you make the plans now and pay for it later? And then also for you, are expert in money that you are, does Medicare play any part in this?
Medicare does not have any part in it at all. The only thing that Medicare is involved with is that if there is a surviving spouse, they can have a survivor's benefit of a whopping, what is it, $255?
Yeah.
So they're no big deal. As far as paying for it, there's usually a funeral trust that's created. What it is you, well, do you have to pay for it in advance? No. I can go to Nate and tell him what I want, have a file with him that specifies what I want, and if I can't pay for it now, at least my family will know what I want and follow that, and then it's up to them to pay for it later. On the other hand, I can also make plans to pay for it now. There are several ways to do it, either to pay for it in a lump sum or in a phased method. A prepaid funeral trust for Medicaid planning purposes. For example, when someone is going into a nursing home and we need to determine how much assets they have to see if they qualify for Medicaid, a prepaid funeral trust is not a countable asset.
Okay. All right. Well, we've had a caller. June called in, and if you prefer not to speak on the air, that's okay. We have Justin back in the control room answering your calls, and you can give him your question, and he'll type it up and send it out to us here in the studio on our teleprompter. June has just called in, and June wants to know, is pre-planning new, and are there even newer features of pre-planning recently? I'm going to talk to you about this, Nate, because I had asked you before the show, is this, is business picking up? Are more people doing pre-planning?
Yeah.
Where does this all fit for
Yeah,
June?
to answer the question, is pre-planning new? relatively new in the form that we do it now. In other words, in the fact that we go into people's homes or they come into the funeral home to do their pre-planning. But historically, people have been pre-planning for thousands and thousands of years. And I think one of the questions, are there new features? Relatively new, yes. There are ways to set money aside, as Robert had mentioned a little bit earlier, that are a little bit different than 30 or 40 years ago. You can actually pay over time. Certainly, you can pay all at once too.
Really?
But there are more options, if you will, for people today than there were 20 years ago. And in the 22 years that I've been doing this, I've seen huge changes in the age group of people that are pre-planning. When I first started, typically it was a much older person. But there are some real advantages for families, younger families in their 30s, 40s, 50s, to pre-plan and prepay.
Right. And I know a lot of younger people are going ahead and buying cemetery lots so they can be next to their family members at a young age.
And you would do this for the very same reason.
Yeah.
You're picking out a plot because you want to make sure that you have those things done ahead of time. Making the funeral arrangements and prepaying those for the same exact reasons, so that things are going to be taken care of, and that when the time comes, the money's going to be there.
Steve?
Can I ask? I'd like to follow up with your question. What are some of those big advantages for younger families over older families?
Well, the way it's structured today is if you're younger and you're in good health, you can make payments over time, and many times by doing that, you actually pay less than what the funeral would cost today.
Really?
So that is a huge advantage, because over time the costs are going to go up. So every year you don't do something, typically those costs rise. Not every year, but typically they do. And so when you prepay your funeral expenses, you're basically locking in the goods and services that you prepay at the funeral home, so that no matter how long you live or what happens to you, the money that you've set aside is going to pay for those when you pass away.
So when they've met with you to pre-plan their funeral, and you give them a cost, that's what it's going to be, even if the funeral costs rise.
Yeah, and you need to be careful when you say that's what it's going to be, because it really doesn't lock the prices in, but it guarantees that even if the costs do go up, the money that has been set aside for the things that are done at the funeral home. There's two parts of a funeral. The things that we physically do, and then the outside expenses, and that could be sales tax, death certificates, flowers, money for the minister.
Those you can't control. Yeah.
Typically, people will put money away for those things, but again, those are not things that we do physically at the funeral home. So when that money, the money does sit in the trust and grows, but the family may owe more for those. But by law, the things that we do, that you prepay, are guaranteed to be paid with the money that's in the trust when you pass away. So think about that in terms of other things in your life that you could do ahead of time that would guarantee that would be paid.
Right.
And there aren't any other ones.
There aren't.
And so it really
great.
is a very, very big advantage. Again, you have to realize families coming in under duress, having to make all of the decisions that they have to, having the money there to provide the services that the person wants is a difference maker. And like I said, I've seen it personally, and I've seen it with the families that we serve too. There's a big difference between the families that come in with things done ahead of time and those families that don't have things done ahead of time.
I bet.
Yeah.
I will, if I'd just add, I've had just in the last week a person say they were so happy that they had prepaid and pre-planned the funeral, and commented to me just out of the blue that they were so happy they'd done that. It's a big advantage, I think. For
Yes, it's something. It's one thing less you have to do on a very stressful day.
Right.
Absolutely.
And there are. Nate was talking about the guarantee of the price of the goods and services that he would provide. Normally, if you choose to prepay and pre-plan at your local funeral home, as Nate said, those services are guaranteed at if you use them at the time of need. If you decide to retire in Florida and happen to die over there, and your spouse wishes to, you to be buried down in Florida, then the particular funds that you have set aside are still good down there, but the funeral home in Florida would not necessarily honor the guarantee that was made over here.
Okay, so then you would transfer, say, to
You
the
betcha.
funeral
And that's
home
the
in
nice
Florida.
thing about it in the state of Indiana. When someone prepays, you're not locked into doing business with that funeral home, and the money is your money. It goes with you wherever you go. The funeral home doesn't keep it. We don't physically even receive any of it until we physically provide the services that you had planned for. And if we don't, and your family decides, because maybe the kids are in Florida now and maybe that's where they want mom and dad to go, all of the money plus all of the interest that was in that product goes with them.
Okay.
So there's no money that's left behind or kept.
Okay. Tom has called in, and Tom wants to know this. Can you set in granite your funeral so that no money have to exchange hands at the time of service? Who would like to address
I
that?
think that's another good question. It kind of gets back to what I said a little bit earlier. The outside expenses, or again, the part of the funeral bill that isn't physically provided by the funeral home, those outside expenses, and maybe that's what Tom's referring to, no. We can't guarantee that the money that you set aside today will cover those expenses. So we can't guarantee that at the time of death that the family would not need more money for those types of things. Again, death certificates.
Yeah.
The funeral home doesn't control, the cost of those, the flowers, all of those ancillary items that typically the funeral home would pay for a family, and then the family would pay the funeral home in the past. But again, those types of things, there's still a chance that the family would owe more money. And one of the things that in particular in our area, they didn't used to charge for the obituary in the newspaper. Now
But
that's
they
a
do
paid
now.
item. Yes,
yeah.
you bet.
Isn't it
It's
by
expensive.
inch or
Yes,
something?
Yeah.
you bet. And
It's
so
expensive?
Yeah.
many times the families that I've taken care of in the past, before 2003, I believe is when they started. So that part of it wouldn't be in there. And I want to make sure families are very careful about when they do pre-plan what they share and tell their children, especially. As we hear and have heard a lot of times where the family would come in and say, Mom and Dad said everything was taken care of. And so you have to be careful with the definition of everything, because there still could be things that they didn't choose to prepay. And we want to make sure that the family has all the correct information, because the last thing we want is a family to come in and have some ill towards the funeral home because
When
the
it's
family
not
didn't.
your fault. It's
Yes,
not- you're
and
not
that can
really
happen. But
involved.
you have to remember too, and I can remember my dad telling me my grandfather's pre-planning was telling my dad that when he died, take me down to this person, because that's that was pre-planning in the 60s and 70s. So
take me here.
pre-planning has changed a lot, and it's a lot more refined and defined, and it's so much easier when those things are taken care of ahead of time. So the family, I have 7 brothers and sisters, and we don't agree on pizza toppings, so
Let alone funeral arrangements.
You betcha.
Bob, I want to ask you kind of an unusual question, but I bet something that many of you are thinking. What if you don't pre-plan your funeral? Or maybe Mom just tells you, I just want to be buried right here on the family farm or out in the backyard. Can you do that, Bob, legally?
Well, no, you can't. In Indiana, since about I'm not sure, 1940s, 1950s, there has been a state statute that says that that human remains must be buried in a cemetery, a mausoleum, or a columbarium, one of those things. You cannot just bury Mom, not even in the woods in the family farm.
Okay. What about
Ashes?
ashes? I mean, a lot of people, tell me if I'm wrong, Nate, but I think I'm hearing more and more people choosing cremation. Can you spread the ashes on the farm or on the lake?
You can spread the ashes on the farm, on the lake. The statute says that you can mix them with earth, you can spread them on earth, you can spread them on water.
You can
but
mix them.
in other words, you can dig a hole and bury them in,
Oh, okay, you can bury them.
in the
Okay.
backyard if you want.
Okay.
But you have to be careful. You have to have the landowner's permission to enter, or else you'll be trespassing. But,
Seriously? You would be.
I mean, if you
Went on your neighbor's yard.
yeah, one on your neighbor's yard.
So you're not going to have your ashes put on Steve's yard.
I might, but
It would be trespassing.
right, that would be trespassing, and I, as the trespasser, could be liable for damages.
I mean, that's it. Pretty interesting, because I'm sure people think it's my body. I mean, I can do whatever I want to.
Yeah, I had one guy
with
that
it.
said that he wanted to be buried at sea, and said, well, if you can pay for the the Navy
ship.
ship to take you out to sea, you can do what you want, but it has to
Okay.
be paid for. You can't just say, I want to do this and let somebody else worry about paying for it.
In pre-planning, Nate, we were talking a little bit about cremation. Is that a choice that people might say that they want to do? And if so, do you assist with the
You bet.
scattering of ashes,
Especially
or
with
do you bury
cremation,
them?
we would want to make sure, again, especially with cremation, that if that's your choice, please sit down and talk to someone that can give you all the information that you're going to need, because as Steve mentioned, with cremation, your cremated body can be sent into space. Your cremated body can be made part of a living reef. Your cremated body can be made into a diamond. So what we really caution people from doing is casually at Christmas or Thanksgiving or in passing just saying, when I die, just bury me in the backyard in a post hole. That may be the only conversation your family ever has regarding what to do, when I pass away. So it's all about getting, and I think in any situation, good information and the right information. Because we want to make sure that your cremated body doesn't end up, in a closet somewhere or in a car in a trunk. You've seen these things in the newspaper where somebody sells a house or they sell a car and there's
And they
someone's
find the
cremated
ashes.
body is.
Yeah.
So it's important to have a plan, especially if you're going to be cremated, because there are many more options for those families than there ever used to be.
Okay. All right. We do have another caller. Jim has called in, and he wants to know, and I think we addressed this a little bit, Bob, but if you can clarify this. Jim says, as a client of Medicaid, what can you set up to pay for the funeral?
Well, as a Medicaid person, a pauper's funeral is, maybe Nate can answer the question.
Well, I
better
think
than-
maybe it's more than a one-part question, because prior to someone going on Medicaid, as we talked about a little bit earlier, as Robert mentioned, you can set funds aside for any type of service that you want. So the funeral money is exempt from the Medicaid process.
Right.
So it's not attachable for someone that has to go, and Steve mentioned this, and we do seminars a lot, where a family may have one of these bumps in the road where they have to go to a nursing home or long-term care facility and they exhaust their funds. Prior to that, if they've got the money set up in an irrevocable trust, that money is exempt from Medicaid. So you can have any type of funeral that you want to, as far as that goes, as far as Medicaid's concerned. Now, the second part of that may be if you're on Medicaid.
and have not pre-planned.
Yeah, and you haven't done anything. You can still, pre-plan. You can still make your wishes known, and there are some other funds that can be added to someone's funeral if they're strictly going to be on Medicaid, and there are no additional, if you will, funds to pay for maybe what you would want to consider as a traditional funeral. And then the funeral homes would offset those costs for those funerals that they provide.
Well, Steve, I want to go over to you for a minute, or did you want to add to what
I was
Nate
just going
said?
to add to what Nate was saying, yes, that if you do this pre-planning and pre-paying prior to qualifying for Medicaid, if it's done correctly, irrevocable, non-assignable kind of funeral trust with the correct designation of beneficiary, it's locked up, as Nate has said, and that it's taken out of a person's assets in order to qualify. And there's strict rules to qualify for Medicaid about how much you can have in assets, and this just removes them from that pot, if you will. It saves them. So I just wanted to explain.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. We've had another caller, and that is Judy. This might be typical of the times. Judy wants to know some more information on green funerals.
Yeah,
Do
and-
you get that a lot?
Yeah, that question, certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, or that topic or the subject matter and the terminology is something that we
Can you
hear a lot
explain
more of.
what green
Well, I think
funerals-
when people are less of a footprint, maybe not a marked grave, maybe not a casket that, a metal casket, maybe a wicker casket. But the true definition of a green burial would be the least carbon footprint that you could leave. And I think a true green funeral, people would be surprised at how expensive it would be to actually have the property or the cemetery, if you will, to accommodate what that would entail. No vault, in the ground.
It would be more expensive to not do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, because it would entail
Seriously?
more planning, more work for the cemeterians, and that may not be what she's referring to necessarily. But I think, and again, the terminology "green funeral"
Yeah.
has been a subject that a lot of people, but we don't really see much of that, quite frankly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, since organic is
You
what
betcha.
everybody's
Yes.
thinking,
Yes.
it might be something that
Yeah,
continues
less
to be
of a footprint.
popular.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. All right. Now we've talked a little bit about where you can bury someone, and a little bit about cremation. Steve, I want to go to you for the legal ramifications. Is there anything involved with this that deals with probate?
Well, sure. When a person dies, their estate has to be settled, and that can be done through a series of probate procedures, either with a supervised estate, unsupervised estate, or small estate procedure. That follows up after Nate's done, then people should come into us or some lawyer, their lawyer, and make arrangements to handle the estate through usually a probate procedure.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, our half hour has gone so fast. It always does when you guys are here. Well, I appreciate your expertise and sharing some good information with our viewers. That's what we do here on PBS and on Senior Spotlight. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight, and I want to thank our guests, Steve Adair and Bob Ray, our attorneys who give such expert legal advice. And then tonight with us, Nate Heffel, who has been certainly very informational in terms of pre-planning for funerals. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week here on Wednesday night.